Street. Very hit-and-miss day for the Dow Jones Industrials, but they have eked out a small gain over the course of the session. Oh, that was a very wimpy sort of boop, boop, boop of a gavel. But it was a wimpy sort of day. The Dow has just given back most of the gains of the day. But the day is over. Trading has finished. It's Tuesday. It's the 26th of June. Tonight, Harley Davidson versus the President of the United States. Donald Trump is warning of taxes like never before. First, investors sold GE. Now GE is selling most of its investments. And Lionel Messi lives on in Russia. Late drama for Argentina at the World Cup. We'll put that into perspective for you. I'm Richard Quest, live in the world's financial capital, New York City, where, of course, I mean business. Donald Trump is revving up his spat with Harley Davidson. The US president says Harley is using retaliatory tariffs as an excuse. Gentlemen, the sort of noise these machines make, most impressive indeed. Thank you, Lucky, and thank you, Gary. On the important point of the story, President Trump threatening it will be the beginning of the end for Harley Davidson, these magnificent machines, if they surrender and move production overseas. This American icon has suddenly become a symbol for Donald Trump's trade war strategy.
Harley Davidson is using that as an excuse, and I don't like that because I've been very good to Harley Davidson, and they used it as an excuse, and I think the people that ride Harleys are not happy with Harley Davidson, and I wouldn't be either.
So, these machines, Harley Davidson, well, they are as American as apple pie, and arguably more so. But they've already been made overseas for years. If you look at the map, the international plants for Harley Davidson, well, you've got Brazil, up in Manaus. You've got India, where they're made in Bawal, Thailand, and Australia. They're made on the southern coast in Adelaide. Just last year, 2 weeks into the Trump presidency, the Harley executive team were some of the first guests that Donald Trump welcomed to the White House. Today, he said they had surrendered, they'd put up the white flag, they'd given in. Back then, he went out of the way to thank Harley for making things in the United States.
Harley Davidson is a true American icon, one of the greats. So thank you, Harley Davidson, for building things in America. I think you're going to even expand. I know your business is now doing very well, and there's a lot of spirit right now in the country that you weren't having so much in the last number of months that you have right now.
What the difference a couple of years make? He loved them then, and now today he says they've surrendered and quit. And that if they move, their aura will be gone. What we do know for sure is that Harley has become collateral damage in this trade war. Seriously, look at the stock price. It's down some 30% since Donald Trump took office. A straight line down from 57 to 41. And it's easy to understand why. Weakening sales, even though there's a growing economy in the United States. But they're paying more for higher steel because of the tariffs that have just been introduced. And the Harleys exported from the United States to the US will attract a 20% extra tariff, 36% in total, along with, of course, down to India, where it's a 50% tariff. Put it together. Clyde Fessler is a former vice president at Harley Davidson. He is the man widely credited with the rebranding of these superb machines. Spent 25 years with the company, joins me now on the phone from Rapid City in South Dakota. So, sir, do you subscribe to the president's view that the aura of these machines will have gone if they start manufacturing more overseas, as they have been?
Well, that's a mouthful of information that really has to be explained. Harley Davidson, in its 115 years of existence, has, for the most part, been a domestic company shipping to Canada, the United States, and Mexico. In the 1980s, during the turnaround, we became an international company with a better quality and shipping motorcycles and exporting into different areas throughout the United States and the world. And now comes the third phase of Harley becoming a global corporation. And a global manufacturer like Mercedes-Benz, like Honda, like BMW, have plants all over the world. The difference here, I think, is really the heartbeat and the soul of Harley Davidson, which is a V-twin engine, potato, potato, potato. And that engine, the tool up for that engine and make it abroad would be very, very expensive. So if I was Harley, yes, I'd start assembling some motorcycles overseas, but the heartbeat, the engine will be made in Milwaukee.
So Harley Davidson is well and truly stuck in the middle, isn't it? Because it's paying higher prices for steel because of the tariffs on incoming steel, and it's being hit by the tariffs to Europe. It's not surprising that they have made this decision.
Well, back when I was in Harley Davidson and managing director of Europe, we put together a strategic plan on how we're going to increase our market share in Europe. And at that time, we were selling about 4,000 motorcycles a year. Last year, we shipped over 45,000 motorcycles to Europe and the surrounding region. So Europe is very important to us as far as overall global strategy. But if the engines and the heartbeat are still made in Wisconsin, where the technical skills are, I don't see the impact that much.
So, a hard question to ask, but how do you feel about the US president threatening Harley Davidson? And that's what it was, a straightforward threat that if you quit, he said they had surrendered, they'd quit, they'd put up the white flag, and that they would be taxed heavily for doing so. How do you feel about that?
There's a lot of information there that it's got to settle down over a period of time. I don't think those ideas are practical. We're still going to be a U.S.-based company, manufacturing. And by the way, I've been retired for Harley Davidson for 15 years. I'm not a spokesperson for them, so I have to emphasize that. You're getting my personal opinion. I think Donald Trump's heart is in the right place. I think his methods are a little bit unusual. But if you look at what's happened on the international basis since World War II, all of our politicians have given away America to the rest of the world. Now we have a businessman in charge, and he's making a business out of it, and you negotiate a little bit differently when you're a business person than when you're a politician.
Sir, thank you for joining us. I've got two Harleys in the studio with me. I wish I could tell you which model they were so you could tell me something about them, but unfortunately, a Harley 103, it looks like. Anyway, thank you for joining us, sir. Later in the programme, I'll be speaking to the foreign editor of the Times of India about how Prime Minister Modi is using Harleys as an olive branch in the trade talks. Gingerly walking past the price of these machines, by the way, in the tens of thousands of dollars. Gingerly walking past on Wall Street. Harley Davidson ended the session relatively flat, and so did the broader market. You can see the numbers for yourself. After a rough start, US investors appear to have halted the selling for now. Walgreens, which joined the Dow, ended the day roughly 1% lower. It's its first day trading on the Dow. Whilst the trade war simmers, Donald Trump is hailing a win in America's highest court. So let's turn our attention to the travel ban, which was overturned, the travel ban has now been deemed legal by the US Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision. It's the third version of the ban that restricts entry to the United States from 7 countries. They are primarily Muslim-majority countries. Jessica Schneider joins me from Washington. Jessica, the president's initial reaction was, wow. It was swiftly followed up by a great victory, and indeed it was. But we have to remember, it was the third iteration of this ban. So I'm guessing, you know, they should have got it right eventually.
Yeah, you have it just about right, Richard. You know, the president celebrating nonetheless, even though you're right, this was the third version of this travel ban. It was interesting to watch the president celebrate here. We saw a very brief wow on Twitter initially this morning. Then the White House released a statement calling it vindication, the Supreme Court ruling in their favor. And then the president spoke out about it shortly thereafter, calling this a big win for America as well as the Constitution. But you're right. This was the third version of the ban that was put into place about a year ago. The Supreme Court ruled just a few months after that it could go into effect while this whole appeals process went through. And now, of course, today the Supreme Court saying, yes, it is within the president's authority. This ban is okay. The president can enact it.
The president's getting some wins in, really, isn't he? I mean, the Supreme Court view, the immigration, although he had to sign the executive order, his popularity numbers are rising, maybe not to stratospheric levels, but there's a strong argument to be made that the wind is in the sails.
Well, it's interesting. Some of the latest polling shows the approval rating among Republicans in favor of the president at a whopping 90%. So people within the president's own party strongly agree with what he's doing, whether it's protecting borders, whether it's keeping immigrants out from the 7 select countries as part of this travel ban. So you're right. The wind may be in his sails right now. And of course, with today's vindication, as he called it, from the Supreme Court, even more so.
Jessica, thank you for that. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the number of tourists visiting the United States. On this programme, we've said before, that's actually falling. Trips to the US are down 4%. Global trips are up 7%. US Travel Association, not surprisingly, represents America's travel industry and is somewhat concerned about this. Jonathan Grella is their Executive Vice President for Public Affairs and joins me from Washington. The reality is, you're in a difficult spot here, aren't you? Because when I travel, and I travel more than most, what people say is, look, love America, love Americans, but why would I want to go there when I'm not made to feel welcome? And to some extent, Supreme Court has reinforced that today.
Sure. Security must come first, and without security, there could be no travel, of course. But it's imperative that we send a welcome message around the world. We spent the last year and a half talking about who can't come to America. Now it's time to talk about who can come to America, and we should.
Okay, how do you do that? Because you can have campaigns, you can have slogans, you can have cutesy symbols. But when the Supreme Court rules that a travel ban is legal, and when visitors at CBP checkpoints feel unwelcome, and when there's a story about a Canadian woman on the West Coast who accidentally crossed the border and was locked up for 2 weeks, you've got a hard sell on your hands.
No question, Richard. The bottom line from our perspective is that words do move markets, but policies matter, of course, as well. We should market America to the rest of the world through Brand USA, which we need to renew our commitment to that. This administration has embraced the visa waiver program, referring to it as the gold standard. We couldn't agree more with that. So there are a lot of things in terms of words and deeds that we can do to ensure that we're committed and competing. And then that's a really important word here, competing for global market share. Richard, you pointed to the fact that there is a global travel boom going on. Unfortunately, our share is slipping, and we need touchdowns, not just field goals.
Okay, but I still don't quite understand how you're going to do it. I'm sorry to belabor the point, but the reality is, as I say, what are you going to have in our campaign? Are you going to have freebies? Are you going to have, what are you going to do?
Well, it's a holistic approach that's needed. So it's a combination of the bully pulpit being used with a more balanced leisure between the security message about who is not welcome here, but also saying that legitimate travelers are welcome to the United States, as well as marketing the world through Brand USA. Also, getting more visa waiver countries in the program, ensuring that we have proper resources for customs and border protection, and that we are using every link in the chain possible to attract travelers to our country when the rest of the world certainly gets the message that the competition is fierce and they need to leave no stone unturned in welcoming and competing for international travelers.
Jonathan, good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in today. Busy day. Thank you. Appreciate it. As we continue after the break, Uber stays in business in London after a court rules that the ride-sharing firm has made enough reforms and is fit for the London road. And it was do or die for Argentina at the World Cup. Lionel Messi's team scrapes into the knockout stages after a dramatic win against Nigeria. We'll have the update from Russia in just a moment. Two pivotal World Cup matches have just wrapped up in Russia. Argentina scraped through to the last 16 after beating Nigeria 2-1.
Is this the opener?
Yep, yes, it is! Lionel Messi scored an early goal, but Nigeria soon equalised.
Scored for Nigeria.
It was a nail-biting second half, with Argentina eventually sealing the deal in the 86th minute.
A brilliant ball from somebody. They've got the
That's
goal.
what you do. Iceland managed a good challenge against the group leader Croatia.
Keeps his nerve.
But a 2-1 loss eventually puts an end to Iceland's World Cup dreams.
Who can finish it now?
Yes, they finished it.
In style.
Amanda Davies is in Moscow. Daniel Politi is in Buenos Aires for us. All right. Amanda, forgive me. I'm going to go to Daniel first. because I need to know the ecstatic. Daniel, what was it like? How nail-biting before, how effervescent after?
Definitely. I mean, it was a roller coaster of emotions here where we're watching a game in this public plaza, and the first 15 minutes, everyone was very excited. It looked like the Argentine curse had been lifted that we had seen in the past few games. And then in the beginning of the second half, it was extreme depression until Marcos Rojo came with that incredible kick and the whole plaza lit up, and it was all celebration from there on.
All right, Amanda, so they get through, Amanda, but this is turning into the sort of story of this World Cup. Those that should are struggling to could.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, that was 90 minutes of football that really does make you want to sit in a dark room and kind of think about what has just happened. It was epic. And Argentina, as you said, heading into this tournament, really one of the favourites, but have disappointed up to this point. And for a very long time, you thought the only thing Lionel Messi was going to be celebrating this week was his 31st birthday. But he stepped up, he scored when it mattered. And then even when Nigeria got on top of them during the second half, Nigeria, a team, by their coach's admission, a team building for actually 4 years' time in Qatar, not for this World Cup. They were really giving Argentina a run for their money. But Messi, we saw at half-time, put in this team talk that was of like gladiatorial proportions, and he literally dragged this side, kicking and screaming, into the second round. Quite epic.
Daniel, do you think the nerves and the hearts in Argentina can stand the strain of the quarterfinals in the next round?
I think so. I mean, I think suffering is a bit of an Argentine national sport. Everything has to be done with suffering and with a big epic story behind it. So it really does feel like this is even sweeter because of that.
Right, Daniel, thank you to Daniel. Amanda, stay with me. I've got one more question for you, Amanda. And it really is the idea that England, not Germany, will lose to Brazil in the finals. Now, this is Goldman Sachs using the same quantum computing and analytics that they use for markets, say that the firm has made a new prediction. What do you make of it? Do you buy this?
So they genuinely think England are going to get to the final?
Yeah.
I have to say, the number of messages I got from football people, some pretty close to the England team after that pretty emphatic victory the other day, they are pretty confident. But we have to say, England have not played the big teams in this tournament yet. I would absolutely love, to be here to see England reach the final of a World Cup. It happens once in a lifetime if you're lucky, doesn't it? But they've got the biggest test so far to come against Belgium. So let's take victory over Belgium at the weekend, or later this week first, and then I'll come back to you.
Here's the deal. If they get through to the World Cup final, Amanda, a dinner in any restaurant in London for you and me and the friends, and I'm paying. How about that?
That sounds wonderful, as long as we can get a day off for the final as well, Richard.
Who will? Stefan Szymanski is Professor of Sports Management at the University of Michigan and author of Soccernomics. He joins me from Michigan. You heard that? You heard it. How do they make this? How do they make this up, people like Goldman Sachs? How do they work out using the same formulae that have failed to predict markets to predict football?
Well, I think it's exactly the same problem. There are things that are systematic about markets, and there are things that are systematic about football. So we know that, the bigger countries tend to do better, richer countries tend to do better, more experienced countries tend to do better. But there are so many other random factors that can influence the outcome of these games. And when you get to a knockout tournament, it's really down to just a lot of luck and coincidences that happen on the day that it's really not predictable. So throwing out these forecasts is fun and we should enjoy it, but we shouldn't take them very seriously.
What do they base it on?
Well, there are any number of ways you can do this. So you can look at the past, you can look at historical results and try to extrapolate from those. You can look at other factors that determine form, like the quality of the players in leagues around the world. You could look at economic factors. You could look at social demographic factors. There are many things you can throw in here in order to try and come up with a forecast. But again, they all capture only a small part of a very complex reality.
But don't you think it's interesting? I mean, obviously there's a hefty element of fun involved in this. But don't you think it's interesting that somebody like Goldman or any of these big companies that do decide to have some fun and do decide to put this out? It's obviously a bit of publicity, it's a bit of fun, but these are serious people and they're having a bit of a go at it.
Right, but I think this is the way we should take a market forecast from analysts in general, which is they're in the game to make a forecast, and you remember the successes and you forget the failures. There are so many forecasts out there. They're only going to remind you of the ones that turn out to be right. So that's why, actually, cynically, I mean, one should treat all market forecasts in the same way.
Finally, if we take a look at how Portugal struggled, if we take a look at those countries that Germany's had a difficult first round, if we look at the way Argentina today scrapes through, this makes, on the business side, this makes for a better World Cup, doesn't it? It makes for a more engaged World Cup. People are watching more, and it's good for the sport.
Well, the problem with the World Cup in many ways has been the dominance of European and South American teams over many, many decades, and the failure of the other continents really to get a look in. And sadly, that doesn't look very different. If anything, this World Cup, the Europeans are looking more dominant than ever. So in terms of globalization, we may be getting some close games, but we're not really getting that international spread of results that you might hope for to make it truly global.
Good to see you, Stephen. Thank you, as always, helping us understand what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
You need to keep on top of the day's business headlines. You've got a 90 seconds briefing, then it has to be our daily briefing podcast. Updated twice a day before and after the bell. You can ask Alexa or your Google Home Drive. Try this. In fact, I think I must try when I go home tonight. CNN Money Flash Briefing. You don't even have to say please. It's every weekday. After the break, bit by bit, General Electric is getting smaller and smaller, and investors seem to like it. Today, the stock price grew bigger and bigger. Let's do business. Richard Quest. There is more Quest Means Business in just a moment. Uber has its day in court and gets its licence back to operate in London. It's a short licence, but we'll tell you exactly what it means. And Toyota's rebranding one of its most famous models, the Corolla. It wants to attract millennials, no more oldies like me. Before that, you are watching CNN, and on this network, the facts always come first. The US Supreme Court has upheld Donald Trump's travel ban in a 5-4 ruling. It found that the president has authority under immigration law to restrict entry to the country. Mr. Trump's travel ban includes citizens from Iran, North Korea, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and Venezuela. A Sudanese teenager convicted of killing her husband as he raped her for a second time has had her death sentence overturned. Nora Hussein instead will serve a 5-year jail term, and her family will pay a hefty fine. Her story spotlighted the issue of marital rape in Sudan, where the offence is not a crime. Thailand's Deputy Prime Minister says 12 missing boys and their football coach may still be found alive. They've been missing since Saturday and are believed to have been trapped in a flooded cave complex. Rescuers say water levels are constantly rising as the region is being hit by heavy rain. The French President Emmanuel Macron has met Pope Francis at the Vatican. The private meeting went considerably longer than scheduled. According to the Vatican, they discussed migration, the environment and the future of Europe. It was Mr. Macron's first official visit to the Vatican. Now, we've already told you about Argentina. Meanwhile, France and Denmark have officially advanced to the next round of the World Cup. They played to a scoreless draw. That means France win Group C. Australia and Peru miss out and head home. So GE continues to get ever smaller. Yesterday, we told you how it was shrinking in size. Today, on the first day in 110 years, GE is not in the Dow, and the company's become even smaller. The company wants to reduce its debt mountain, and it's doing so piece by piece. Today, the stock was up 8%, so it seriously seems to be working. But the breakup of GE has been just about everywhere. Today, GE will spin off its healthcare business, and it's selling a stake in the oil and gas company Baker Hughes that it only bought recently. That's gone. Yesterday, it said goodbye to its distributed power business, which generates power in remote areas. It was a part of its core business. Gone. As for the other parts of GE, it sold off its century-old rail division some months ago. No longer will its big engines be delivering goods across the United States, and it has yet to find a buyer for its light bulb unit, which, of course, was originally started by Thomas Edison. They invented the light bulb, and now it's on its way out. GE has already got rid of NBC Universal, the network, television network, and its appliance business. Remember, GE was in the fridges and the stoves were in every home in America. And much of GE capital has all but gone too. What's left of GE? What's left? It will focus on aviation, power, and renewable energy. Next jet engines, power turbines, renewable energy. But is that valid for GE? Claire Sebastian is here. Has GE become too small when it's left with just this?
Well, I think that is the new strategy, Richard. They had to shrink because they've got so much debt. They tripled in the last, 4 or 5 years. It was up to 77 billion. These latest divestments and spin-offs, that is supposed to reduce the debt by 25 billion by 2020. But clearly, there's still more they need to do. And I think the next shoe to drop could be that storied dividend. They've already cut it last year for the second time since the Great Depression.
But when they took on all this debt, they knew they were taking it on. So was the strategy flawed? What went wrong? They knew they had that debt. How did they expect to service it? Admittedly, there were some downturns in the oil industry and some of the other areas didn't perform as well.
I think history has shown that that was a flawed strategy. They grew too quickly and in too many different disparate areas. There was an article actually on GE's website that said former CEO Jeffrey Immelt, who was widely seen as one of the most successful CEOs in his time, ran this 125-year-old industrial company like a startup. He did $100 billion worth of deals. He also started to divest a few things by the end of his tenure, but it was just too much too soon, and the business couldn't sustain it.
And yet, the idea of selling off the healthcare, I mean, we're told that is the future of America. Right. The MRI was invented by GE. Its core. Is that a sign of the desperation of times that they would sell that off?
I think it is, Richard. This was one of the best performing units of the business last year with 16% of revenues. It was seen by many to be part of their core strategy going forward. That along with aviation, power and renewables, healthcare was seen as crucial. So I think this took many people by surprise today. But this, as you say, is a sign of how brutal the situation is for them.
The current CEO, Flannery.
Yeah.
The previous CEO, Immelt.
Yeah.
And Jack Welch before him. Well, Flannery can't take any blame. So it's between Welch, who built, I mean, it became known as the house that Jack built, right. GE.
Yeah.
So it's between Welch and Immelt. Who gets the blame? Who will history be least kind about?
It's possible, I think, that it would be Jack Welch, because I think there were more of the bigger acquisitions that happened under him, and Jeffrey Immelt did start to wind down.
Our executive producer, just the second you said Jack Welch, said Immelt in my ear.
Well, I think it's up for debate. It's up for debate. Jeffrey Immelt took over, I think, 4 days before 9/11. He had a lot of difficult decisions to make, and he did end up getting rid of NBC Universal and the appliances business and various other things. But, you know, history will be the judge, Richard.
Thank you. Keep an eye on what they're doing in the future, please.
Got it.
That's what I think. Uber has retained its licence to operate in London after promised a number of changes. Now, in London is Samuel Burke. By the time the Magistrates' Court, which was the appeal court from the original TfL decision, made its decision, you pretty much guessed that's the way it was going to go. Sighs of relief from Uber?
Without a doubt. But Richard, Quest means business. It's all about the winners and the power players. And there are two big winners here. Number one, Dara Khosrowshahi, the new CEO. His strategy is working. He is worth every single penny. And the London mayor told us as much. So on this program, he said there's a whole new style of leadership, a whole new way of communicating. The other big winner here is the London mayor, Sadiq Khan. Now, we're not a British politics show, so I'm not going to get too into it, but he's the mayor of one of the biggest, most important cities in the world. He made a huge gamble, Richard, here. Can you imagine if Uber had lost their license, how many people would have been upset here, how many tourists would have been upset here? He gambled it all, revoked their license, and then got them to the court. They changed their ways, so everybody comes out here a winner.
You say the CEO sort of is the big winner, and yes, he certainly saved it, but really all he did, and I say all, is get the company to behave properly. I mean, they were behaving egregiously, and he put a stop to it.
Exactly. You make it sound so simple, but it's not something that Travis Kalanick was able to do when he was CEO. We're just putting up on the screen there some changes that Uber has made prior to this court decision, and the reasons that you see on this screen, for instance, limiting drivers, working hours, this is the reason why they run the case. But back to your point, Richard, what we really see here is Travis Kalanick's strategy of being as aggressive as possible, served the company incredibly well until it didn't. Once they were established in these markets, that attitude did not serve them. The Khosrowshahi attitude is serving them quite well in London today.
And the victory in London can be used by him in other cases around the world, in the sense of, look, I mean, come on, it's not Paducah, it's London. We proved to London that we were good people, and London liked us and allowed us to do it. It's going to be a very powerful argument.
And Lord knows they've had problems everywhere from London to Paducah. They can use this model in the big cities and the little cities, and absolutely that's what they're going to do. They've conceded some of the biggest places under Khosrow Shahi. They're not going to be in China. There's a lot of places where they've divested, so they've got their markets now. They know what they have to go and do and repeat exactly what they did in London.
Have you ever been to Paducah?
No. Have you?
Several times, because of, I think we need to send next assignment for Burke off to Paducah. Thank you, Samuel. After London, I was sent to Paducah. No, what would that tell me about your career? Coming up, a new trade warning from the US. Stop importing Iranian oil by November or face the consequences. Good evening. Harley Davidson may be a pressure point in the transatlantic trade war. For India, it's been a peace offering. New Delhi is exempting the motorcycles from the $241 million in retaliatory tariffs it's putting on US goods. It comes at a time just as US trade officials are in India to ease the trade tensions. The President of the United States said it's time to negotiate.
I was the one that explained to Harley about 100% tax in India, where they had a tariff of 100%, and I got it down to a much lower number. I think it's 50%, which is far too much, but they were paying 100% tariff. Now, Prime Minister Modi brought it way down, but it's still way too high. No, I will say this, John. Other countries are negotiating, and without tariffs, you could never do that. And if they don't want to negotiate, then we'll do the tariffs.
America's relations with India, both on trade and strategic grounds, are growing in importance, especially as tensions rise with the traditional allies. US Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley's in India. It's a two-day trip to advance ties between the two large democracies. And next week, the US Secretaries of State and Defense will meet their Indian counterparts for the 2+2 Dialogue Summit. Chitnand Rajakarta is the foreign editor of the Times of India and joins me now. Let's just look at Harley Davidson and the decision of India to exempt the Harleys from the new range of tariffs. Was that strategic, or did just somebody decide it was a good idea?
I don't know if there's any strategy involved in it. I think it's a small piece of the whole action. This whole dispute is absurd, Richard. Let me put it as in context. U.S. global trade, $5 trillion. Harley Davidson revenue is $5 billion. Harley's revenues out of India is something like $5 million. It's chump change. It's not something a president of a country should get exercised over and start talking about. And the number of motorcycles Harley sells in India is absurdly low, and particularly in the higher categories. Harley is basically a vanity purchase for most Indians. He complains that the Indians sell thousands of motorbikes in the United States and at zero duty. Have you seen an Indian motorbike in the United States? I haven't. I've lived here 25 years. And I think they sell something like 1,000 motorcycles, mostly in the lower range. So this whole dispute is blown out of proportion. And today we have a situation where the president, who was, sort of lobbying for Harley, literally, made it a talking point. Harley walks out of the United States. Harley says, we're going to go elsewhere and manufacture. I just find the amount of energy is invested in this, and I can think of only one reason. He probably sees the Harley rider as his key demographic. That's his voting base, and he's made it a sort of talking point.
The decision by India, though, to retaliate tit for tat on the steel and aluminium tariffs with 240 million of their own. How dodgy is it for India in terms of, they want to walk this fine line, they have to retaliate, but the last thing the Modi government wants, it's doing the barest minimum necessary so that they don't incur further wrath.
Absolutely. I mean, look, the thing is, it's a dollar-to-dollar retaliation, like China did. So the Indians, I think, have retaliated against, among the items I remember, is almonds. India is the biggest buyer of California almonds. So California almonds, Washington apples. The end result is, look, this is a lose-lose recipe. And the way the president has, dragged it out in public and made it a public sort of talking point all the time, beating countries over the head. First of all, I said it on your last show, it just provokes, it brings pride on the table. The smallest country in the world will be a proud country, whether it's, forget China and India, even smaller countries.
Right.
So you're just, these can be negotiated back channel. And in many instances, the US allows a trade surplus or suffers a trade deficit for other reasons. With India, it's very clear the 8 years of Obama, 8 years before that of Bush, was all aimed at giving India enough leeway to help it grow as a hedge against China. What happened to that policy now?
Okay, so what does India, what does Modi want from this US president?
I think any country, and particularly India, is willing to negotiate. The Indian Commerce Minister was in town a week ago, and he told Americans, you're worried about 23 billion of trade deficit? I mean, it's 1/10, 1/15 of what you have with China. Why are you beating us up? India is a growing economy. It's going to buy 1,000 civilian airplanes over the next decade. It's going to buy a ton of American energy. Already, there's plenty of energy going out of Houston into India. It's going to buy arms by the billions. You know, today's trade deficit will be small beer in 5 years, 10 years from now. And I don't see why the president is getting so exercised over, you know, this particular item, particularly Harley. And like I said, the only reason I can think of is that he sees, you know, Middle America as a demographic and all the Harley riders, you know, roaring into town, the rolling thunders. That's his demographic.
Good to see you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Now, the US is tightening the screw on Iran, urging other countries to stop importing its oil. Crude prices surged today, up more than 2.25% for Brent, and West Texas even more, after the State Department issued the warning which could impact global energy supplies. It comes after Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal and reimpose sanctions. Michelle Kaczynski is at the State Department. The issue here is whether or not there will be repercussions for those who do not. I mean, I'm thinking of the secondary sanctions that came out in the list that the United States did, where you've got companies saying, I'm not touching Iran with a 10-foot pole. Yeah. Will there be the same for those that continue to buy Iranian oil?
Yeah, so we're already seeing that starting with companies, especially European companies, shying away from doing business with Iran, companies stopping, and big companies. We saw some big French companies stop doing business with them, as well as with oil. I mean, we knew that this deadline was coming up even before the pullout. So in April, 1 month before the U.S. pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, we saw Iran produce record oil sales, record exports. The next month in May, we saw that drop. So countries know that these repercussions are coming, and that's exactly the point the U.S. wanted to get across today. So typically, lately, in dealing with the State Department, there wasn't a ton of information. For example, they danced around the answer to the question, there seems to be no support for this among European allies. You know, by the things you're saying, does that mean that they're working with you? It wasn't really an answer to that question. They were asked about exemptions. They didn't want to talk about that. What about talking to Turkey and China about reducing their oil imports from Iran? They said that those conversations really haven't happened yet. But what they wanted to get across was they are going to sanction U.S. allies that will continue to buy oil from Iran.
So when will we expect to start seeing some of this? Because what we've seen, of course, with the tariffs is that the threats are made, but with tariffs, we're seeing them come into effect. It's not just a negotiating ploy. So for the State Department and the Commerce Department and the Energy Department to remain their credibility, they're going to have to act, aren't they, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility that there will be exemptions. They're not ruling those out, which I think was very telling. They're trying to take this hard line saying, you will be sanctioned if you keep doing business with Iran after November 4th. But when you ask about the exemptions, they don't even want to talk about it. So we know that it's still a possibility. We know that they want to take a hard line. So it just remains to be seen what kinds of exemptions they give. Because it's surprising, you know, U.S. allies felt like the timeline would be a lot longer here, like this grace period for cutting off imports from Iran. I mean, it's a big deal to try to reconfigure where you're getting all your energy from, and that's why we're seeing the markets already moving. And we're moving considerably indeed, up 2 to 3%, which is big when they've been falling over the last couple of days on increased production. Good to see you. Thank you. You too. Michelle Kaczynski. As we continue tonight, the best-selling car in history gets a tune-up and a turnaround. And Toyota's hoping a makeover will get the millennials to think twice about a car that when you said you had a Corolla, everybody yawned. Harley Davidson isn't the only automaker struggling with an image problem at the moment. Toyota is trying to get millennials to rethink its top-selling car, the Corolla.
has been given a new sporty makeover. It's luring or attempting to young drivers. Toyota's trying to shape the Corolla's reputation in Japan as a car for the older generation. I think that means me. Peter Valdez-Tapina, who joins me now. What have they done? What have they changed? I mean...
Well, everything. I mean, they've completely re-engineered the car from the top down. Right now, by the way, the Corolla, there are many different versions around the world. Here in the U.S., Toyota sells two different cars called the Corolla that have nothing to do with each other. They're unrelated. So they want to make them all on one platform again. And in re-engineering it, they've also tried to make it a little bit sportier and more fun to drive.
So why not change the name? All right, I understand that the Corolla is the best-selling car of all time.
Mm-hmm.
But if it has an image problem and you're aiming to go for a younger generation, call it something else.
Well,
the Corolla.
Well, they've got the Yaris, which is an even smaller car. But here's the thing. Corolla has an enormous amount of cachet attached to it. Corolla and Toyota sells based on its image of reliability. Toyota doesn't want to lose that. So you want to hold on to that, but really they've quite a bit changed the look of the car. Look at the interiors.
Yes.
And they say they've improved the ride and handling to make it a bit sportier and more exciting. But yeah, I think there's just too much riding on the Corolla name in terms of dependability and reliability, which is still important that they want to save that.
Aston Martin, the other side of the scale, 300,000 for a new vehicle that has an Italian name. It's the most powerful car that they've made at this particular price point. Others have been a lot more expensive.
Much more. This is the most powerful regular production car, so we're excluding cars that sell for over $1 million. They've done some of those. So, but if you're just an ordinarily quite wealthy person, you want a car you can drive every day, this is the car for you. The DBS Superleggera. Superleggera means super light in Italian. It's made with carbon composites and aluminum, 715 horsepower, turbocharged V12 engine. And based on my experience with other Aston Martin models, it should be quite fun to drive.
So will it be popular? I mean, is this the sort of, because it has got competition, the Maseratis and even some of the Ferraris at the lower end. So it does have, would that be the competition for this vehicle?
Yes, I think the competition, again, would be the upper end of Maserati. With this kind of horsepower, this kind of price, you're getting into Lamborghini territory, Ferrari territory. But Aston Martin offers a very different and unique sort of experience. It's a very British kind of supercar. It's a little bit more, driving Aston Martin's a little bit more laid back. Your palms don't get quite as sweaty as they might driving a Lamborghini.
It's all that stitched leather, you know.
That nice leather smell.
Finally, tough question. I'm going to give you the keys to one of them. You can have the new Corolla or the new Aston Martin to borrow for the weekend. Which would it be?
That would be tough. I don't know, man. I think I'd have to go with the Aston Martin. I've thought long and hard about it. I think I'd have to go with the Aston Martin on that one.
Good answer. Good to see you. Thank you. We will... Well, come on. Would you take the Corolla for the weekend? Have you had an Aston? Yes, I'll take the Corolla. Somebody has to take it. After the break, we'll have a profitable moment. Tonight's profitable moment. Harley Davidson made a reasonable decision when they decided to move production overseas to account for the higher tariffs being imposed by Europe. Today, they were threatened by the United States president, who said he would introduce taxes against them. He said they had surrendered. He called them, they had given up. They had put up the white flag. The reality is they made a decision about which they had no choice. Yes, Harleys may have been the company that the president loved just a few years ago. But now they are facing very difficult, extra thousands of dollars on these bikes owned by Gary and Lucky. It's not surprising that they decided to shift production. They've been making bikes overseas for decades. The reality is, as long as the engine's still made in Wisconsin, it's still a Harley. And that's West Means Business for tonight.